Welcome back to talkSPORT USA, talkSPORT's dedicated NFL YouTube channel with myself, Will Varney. And look, we're here in Ireland ahead of the International Series this weekend. The Steelers taking on the Vikings at Croke Park live on talkSPORT 2. And look, it's a pleasure to say that joining me here in Dublin, Steelers reporter for The Athletic, Mike DeFabo. Mike, how are you, my man?
I'm doing great. Definitely a little bit sleep deprived and still adjusting to the time, but nothing a few Guinness can't solve eventually here.
Look, you're speaking my language, Mike. You've only been here a day, but you're speaking my language. Look, it's great to catch up with you, and I really enjoy the work that you do with The Athletic. Look, I have to start with maybe one of the most obvious questions. How has it been the last few months covering this team with all of the drama of Aaron Rodgers' arrival into this organisation? What's the last few months been like for you?
It's been wild and hectic. The Steelers traditionally are a very patient, very conservative organization. They absolutely were not either of those things this offseason. They really were the story of the offseason with General Manager Omar Khan's aggressive approach. Big blockbuster trade for DK Metcalf. The big blockbuster trade dealing Minkah Fitzpatrick for Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. And then, of course, waiting for Aaron Rodgers. And I have to tell you, it was like everything happened at the most inconvenient possible time. I was on vacation with my family when Aaron Rodgers announced that he was going to be signing with the Steelers. But I will say, from someone who produces content for a living, Omar Khan, the general manager, is good for business because the Steelers were the top story and people were very interested in all these multiple moves that they made.
Oh, absolutely. And maybe let's start with that point then that you said that the Steelers were really aggressive this offseason, like you mentioned, going for DK, bringing in Aaron Rodgers. Feels like there's an urgency. I think it's 3 playoff wins in 10 years for this organisation. Did you get that sense that there's pressure? Is there pressure on the board, on Mike Tomlin to really deliver now when the postseason comes? Because last season they reached the postseason and eventually it peters out in really disappointing fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season, which is pretty remarkable. And nationally, there's a lot of praise heaped upon him because of that. But locally in Pittsburgh, the tune is kind of changing a bit. And people, instead of pointing out that he's never had a losing season, they point out it's been 8 years since he's won a playoff game. And you have to realize that this is a very successful and historic franchise. They've won 6 Super Bowls, and they consider themselves, I don't know what the top teams here are in other sports, but like they are that team. They are the Lakers. They are the Yankees. So for them, success is not measured in the regular season. It's measured in the postseason. And so I think that you're absolutely right that you saw them make all these moves because they realized what we're doing is not working. And so I think that you might call it urgency. You might even call it desperation by the way they made all these moves, and we'll have to see ultimately if it comes together and makes a difference in the playoffs. But even if they go 10-7 and lose first round and have a winning regular season, that won't be enough, and that won't be satisfactory for this fan base. Really, I think they're going to be judged better or worse on the playoffs.
And look, we've seen so far 2-1 record, and look, week 1 against the Jets was, I think, surprising to many people, not only for how high scoring it was, but maybe a Steelers defense that we've come to recognize for being so stern, really getting 32 points put on them by Justin Fields and the New York Jets offense that has historically struggled. So maybe going into the defense, it's a defense that I think even Mike Tomlin said pre-season that could be historic, and there could be these expectations. If anything, it's maybe those expectations have really dampened and they've given up explosive plays in these first 3 weeks. What are the feelings amongst this defensive group heading into week 4?
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned it, that Mike Tomlin before the season said he felt this defense could be historic. And Juan Thornhill, a safety, said he felt they could be the best defense of all time. DK Metcalf was saying this is the best defense he had ever gone against. So there was a lot of hype, and this was a unit that last year they were top 10 in scoring. They took the ball away from the opponents more than anybody else. And so my thinking was, okay, they've added Jalen Ramsey. They can be more multiple, more versatile in the secondary. They're going to send more blitzes and pressures. I thought they were going to take another step forward and really achieve their potential. Not to mention, I should have pointed out, they're also the highest paid defense by $24 million, I believe, according to Over the Cap. So they're spending a ton of their salary cap space on the defense. And that's a bigger deal in a salary cap sport where you have a finite amount of money to spend. If you're choosing to be a defensive-minded team and you're spending your money that way and you're not living up to expectations, people start questioning the approach and questioning if you're making the right decisions there. So, I think that the biggest thing optimistically for the Steelers is they have a lot of new pieces. And so maybe it's just going to take some time for those pieces to gel, particularly in the secondary. Having Deshaun Elliott and Joey Porter Jr. injured through the first 3 weeks. I guess Joey played I guess they both played week 1, but the last 2 weeks, those injuries were really significant because then it meant no one was here last year in the secondary. So the hope would be now just more time that eventually they'll be able to figure things out. But ultimately the bar for this defense is going to be very, very high because expectations are often tied to compensation, and the Steelers' defense is being paid the most, so people expect the best.
And I suppose like you add high expectations, a lot of pressure, but do they have the time when you're going all in essentially? And that feels like they are, assessed with how aggressive, like you mentioned, they were. One player I wanted to touch on is TJ Watt, and I think many people are maybe surprised at his impact through these first 3 weeks. I know that he gets 2 sacks last week, and it's a defense that has 5 takeaways, but it feels like maybe that this defense is getting stale, a little bit old. And it's, of course, going to be that front. You have Cam Hayward, TJ Watt. Is the scheme becoming stale? Is that what the frustration is from supporters? Is it that they need to adapt? I know you mentioned they need time, but do you feel like that's what's happening right now?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about the thing you just mentioned. Is this defense stale? Do they need to update their scheme? And I think that they actually have, but they haven't been able to show it fully because of the injuries and because guys are so new. So, one thing that's simple that they are trying to do a little bit is move TJ Watt. He traditionally rushes over the right tackle because he likes to see a right-handed quarterback read his eyes, read when he's going to release the football. Now to throw a bit of a curveball at the defense, he is lining up on the other side a bit more, but it's only a bit more. It's not a significant change. The other change you're seeing, and Mike Tomlin was asked about this today in his news conferences, they're being more aggressive in terms of bringing pressures and blitzes. So extra rushers to impact the quarterback. And since Terrell Austin has been here, the defensive coordinator, they've been more they've preferred to sit back and just rush 4 and play coverage. Because when you blitz, there's the benefit where you can maybe sack the quarterback. There's also the risk involved where you're vacating the zone, and they could take advantage there. So I think you're going to see them blitz a bit more. And then getting really deep into the X's and O's, some of the coverages that they're going to be running, that they have been running, are evolving a bit. So last year the Steelers may have been one of the highest single high safety teams when they had Minkah Fitzpatrick there to basically play center field and try to ball hawk. Now with him gone, they're moving to more 2 high safety looks. And introducing some different kinds of coverages. Quarters coverage, where basically you got to imagine the field cut into 4 places. They want to run a bit more of that. Last year they ran about on 5.5% of dropbacks. They ran quarters. Now that's up to about 15%, so maybe 3 times as much. And within that comes the coverage disguises and the pre and post snap rotations to kind of mess with a quarterback so they can't get a good sense of what the coverage is. So I think as this group has more time together, I think you are going to see some more coverage disguises, more pressures, and some different kinds of coverages.
And like you say, injuries have an impact. You have to adapt as well to a scheme. I suppose then moving back towards the offense and what we've seen from this offense through this opening 3 weeks, I think you could say the same again, that maybe we're still waiting to see the best of this offense. We obviously saw that, Aaron Rodgers can still do it. We saw that in week 1, how explosive he can be, 4 touchdowns. But then there have been these teething problems, whether it be on the offensive line, whether it be the communication with his receivers. And even though the Steelers have this great red zone efficiency, it feels like it's troublesome getting the ball that far up the field. What have you seen from the offense through these first 3 weeks?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me is just this young offensive line is still experiencing growing pains. So the Steelers have invested so much into their offensive line. They have first-round picks at left and right tackle, a second-round pick at center, fourth-round pick at right guard. And the hope was to turn that position group into the strength of the offense. And you see other teams like the Philadelphia Eagles that win on the backs of those offensive linemen. That was the goal. They're just not there right now. And so that's created a big problem for them. They're only averaging 2.8 yards per carry, one of the worst in the league. And this is an offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, who basically has this position because he's coordinated effective rushing offenses in the past. And historically, the Steelers fancy themselves as a running football team. That's part of their identity, and they're not doing it well right now. So that's one big thing, is like just that the line needs more time and they need to continue to develop. In terms of Rodgers himself, he's 41 years old, and he'll acknowledge himself that he's not the same physically. Now, he still has a great mind, and his ability to process the game pre and post snap is phenomenal. And that's really an asset to the Steelers. He also still has a really quick trigger. He can absolutely throw the football better than even guys in their 20s right now. That's still elite. But now that he had that 2023 Achilles injury, he's getting up there in age, he does not move around like he once was. So what that means for the offense is they're relying a lot right now on short, quick passes. Get the ball out of Rodgers' hands as fast as possible so that young offensive line doesn't get affected by the pass rush, and get the ball to the playmakers. So they're actually averaging 5 air yards per attempt, which is the lowest in the entire league. They're throwing the ball shorter than anybody else, but yards after the catch, they lead the league. And so the hope is like guys like DK Metcalf, who's a big physical freak, who can turn a 3-yard gain or a screen pass into a 50-yard gain. That's going to need to be a big part of their offense going forward. And then getting the ball in space, like little quick guys like Calvin Austin, where you can make him dangerous in space. That's going to need to be a part of it. So my fear, there's 2 ways this could go. My fear would be if teams realize you're trying to get it out of Rodgers' hands quickly, they start playing receivers tighter, and they get to him by sending pressures. That could be a nightmare scenario for the Steelers. And that's what I think that you're going to see maybe from the Vikings here, is bringing a lot of pressures, a lot of blitzes, a lot of tight coverages, so that Rodgers can't just dump the ball off quickly. On the flip side, Rodgers has said, like, if they can run the ball effectively and get them out of the 2 safety looks, he thinks that they can start do more in terms of pushing the ball downfield in the passing game. And so that would be the hope, is if you run the ball a little bit more, the rush doesn't get to Rodgers as much because they're not one-dimensional, and then maybe they can push the ball down the field a little bit more. But we'll have to see. I think it's going to be a work in progress for this offense throughout the year.
Yeah, final couple of questions from me, Mike. Really appreciate your time. You mentioned there about the offensive scheme and basically having to use the pass to really open up the run and really get Jaylen Warren going, whether it be Gainwell. Caleb Johnson has struggled early on in his NFL career. How can Arthur Smith do that? Because right now it feels like you said, there are teething problems on the offensive line. It feels like they're having to get the ball out quick, a lot of screens, and there's a lot of talent. You look at this tight end room with Pat Fryermuth, with Darnell Washington, and then you trade for Jonnu Smith, and it feels like they're not really maximizing the Jonnu Smith, for example, that we saw with the Dolphins last year, and how impressive he was. So what does this offense need to do? Is it, again, time, or is it that Arthur Smith needs to adapt, and maybe Aaron Rodgers needs to also understand that getting the ball out quick, that's not just going to solve the problems. They need to protect this quarterback.
Yeah, I think that running the football really is like the answer to a lot of these questions, because they can't push the ball downfield because the opponents are sitting these 2 high safety shells. So that's forced them to throw the ball short. They're having trouble protecting Aaron Rodgers, and part of that's because they're not running the ball effectively. So I think just finding a way to create some kind of cohesion in the running game is just such a huge answer to so many of their problems right now. And so I think that that's part of it. One thing Arthur Smith really does like to do is try to get opponents, defenses in advantageous situations for the offense in terms of their personnel. So he likes to put multiple tight ends on the field with the thinking that they're going to match you with their base personnel, and then maybe you can get a Jonnu Smith on a linebacker or something, a bigger, more physical guy. So I think that they'll do more of that, try to scheme guys open and try to use some tactics like that in terms of personnel to get themselves in better matchup. But again, I think a lot of it just goes back to, can you run the football? And if you can, that's going to make life just so much more easier on this offense.
And they'll be hoping to do that this weekend when they take on a Vikings defense that, like you say, is a wealth of talent, and the scheme as well is so impressive under Brian Flores. Aaron Rodgers played against Brian Flores' defense last year in London, and it was a rough day at the office. 3 interceptions. It was just a woeful day for him, maybe one of his worst that he's had within the NFL. So how do you think he's going to look come Sunday? What lessons do you think he's learned maybe from last year that he can take into this year, as he tries to almost go toe-to-toe with that Brian Flores defense?
Yeah, the Vikings defense is so unique and so challenging because of the fact that they show so many different kinds of looks. And so they might have 10 guys at the line of scrimmage, but then at the snap of the ball, only rush 3 of them. Yeah. Pre-snap, they might look like they're in a 2 safety shell and they're going to be playing cover 2. Then all of a sudden they may rotate and it looks like man coverage. Then it turns out they're playing quarters. So it's fascinating to me because Aaron Rodgers is so cerebral and he's so good at making these little adjustments at the line of scrimmage and winning those cat and mouse games. And we saw it just last week. The Steelers were driving and they needed a touchdown to win the game. And he recognized a certain coverage and gave Calvin Austin a little hand signal to alter his route, ends up throwing the game-winning touchdown. So you see it work, but it's just going to be such a challenge against this kind of defense. So it's going to be a really interesting cat and mouse game, but I think this is going to be one of the toughest opponents that Aaron Rodgers has to face this season, just because declining mobility, they're going to get after him with pressures, and then his strength is his ability to adjust and make changes at the line of scrimmage. That's going to be nullified to a large degree by some of the schematics and some of the changes pre-snap that the Vikings are willing to do. So I think it's going to be a very tough day for the Steelers offense.
Finally from me, Mike, looking at this season on the whole, I know we're only 3 weeks through the season, there's so much football left to be played, but from what you've seen so far, with how aggressive that they were in the off-season, knowing that the playoffs and playoff wins were essentially the goal, how close are you, do you think, to seeing them win a playoff game this season, or do you think they maybe even miss out on the playoffs? What are your expectations for this Steelers team?
Maybe just because I've seen it happen so many times, I think this is going to be a team that finishes right around 10-7,
Okay.
10 wins, makes the playoffs, but I could see them having another first-round exit.
Yeah.
The things that need to change are the defense. The hope really would be the defense plays up to its paycheck. And by the end of the season, the Steelers have a dominant defense that they can really lean upon. You would really hope that the offensive line develops so that they have a more consistent running game. They can protect Rodgers. And then Rodgers just push them that next level to get them over the hump. Because, I mean, in years past, Mike Tomlin has taken dominant defense and very poor quarterback play and gotten to the playoffs.
Yeah.
So we've seen him do this before, and for so many years, people were saying, if they only had a quarterback, if they just had a quarterback, they've got the defense, they've got the running game, if they only had the quarterback. So the hope would be the team comes together enough that by the end of the season, you're saying, okay, I think that maybe they have the quarterback that they could contend.
Just very quickly, because I think that's really interesting. All this talk about Aaron Rodgers, does it feel like that this is just a one-year thing and that next year, clean slate, new quarterback potentially, they look in the draft after what was essentially a disaster with Kenny Pickett, do they go back into the first round to find a quarterback in what may be a heavy quarterback class, or do you think Aaron Rodgers potentially sticks around regardless of whether they make the playoffs or not this season?
Yeah, so Aaron Rodgers is a tough guy to
I can imagine.
To pin down on
I can
anything.
imagine.
But on the Pat McAfee show, they did ask him, do you think this is going to be your last year? And he said, it probably is. So I think barring something unforeseen, I think this will be his last year in the NFL. And I think part of the reason why the Steelers even have Rodgers as the quarterback is because they've been planning ahead to next year. Next year is supposed to be a really loaded draft class at the quarterback position. And the Steelers have a lot of draft capital. The draft also coincidentally happens to be in Pittsburgh. So it'd be the perfect story if they find their next future franchise quarterback at the draft in Pittsburgh. I think right now there's like a 98% chance that that's their strategy. That's their thought process is next year is the quarterback draft. Next year they're going to get their answer. But truly, I guess you really never know until it ultimately happens, because I'm not sure that 2 years ago I would have said Aaron Rodgers was going to be playing a football game in Ireland for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think that's the approach and that's the hope, is that the Steelers finally get their long-term answer at quarterback next year in the draft.
Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. Enjoy Dublin. Enjoy the game on Sunday. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.